anybody's looking for someone to do voiceover work, Trevor does very well, especially when his voice is gone from sickness and colds and things like that. But we're in the middle of this series, Seeking God in a Search Bar World. If you got a Bible with you, we're going to be in Psalm 19. If any kids want to head over to Children's Church, Cassie is going over that way. So you can go over there with her and Anna, it looks like. So you can check that out too. And if you want to scan this code and be on the Bible app, and you can just open that up right there on your phone through this picture, you can do that. And at the end of this week's notes, there is another reading plan for this week. So we'd invite you to get in there on those Bible app reading plans. But other than that, let's go ahead. Let's jump right into Scripture, Psalm 19, verses 1 through 4. David writes, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech. They use no words. No sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. In the heavens, God has pitched a tent for the sun." So last week, I dropped a bunch of stats on you for those who were here last week, or maybe you watched online. We had a bunch of online stats for the things that people are searching for in this world. And I'm going to drop a few more on you this morning, so just bear. So among those billions of answers that are coming to these questions, particularly the questions about God, and a lot of these results, sometimes they bring more what? They bring more confusion than enlightenment. How do we, as the people of God, seek God in a search bar world? Not just us, but all people. How do people seek God in this world? And I mentioned this last week, whether we recognize it or not, whether we want to admit it or not, and whether we like it or not, people are turning to the digital world to find answers for their questions. They're seeking the answers to some of the big questions of life digitally. And these are the questions of origin. And we do ask questions of origin sometimes about our lives. Where did I come from? Where did I come from? Who? And then there's questions of purpose, like what am I doing here? Who am I really? Questions even of faith. Questions like those ones we talked about just a second ago. Is God real? And if he's there, does he really care? Does he really see me? Does he really have a plan? Does he really have a purpose for my life? And I want to tell you, we need to know the answers to these questions. If you are going to be a person of God in the world today, if you are going to be a follower of Jesus Christ in the world today, you need to know the answers to some of these big questions of life. And I want to tell you, maybe some of these questions are one that you're asking yourselves. Maybe sometimes you have these things that rattle around in your head. Well, why do I believe this? Why do I believe that? And you better also know not just what you believe and why you believe it, but you need to know how to share it with other people. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15 says this. It says, "But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord, and always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do it with gentleness and respect." As you heard from the video this morning that just played, we're trying to do that during this series. We're trying to seek some answers for some of the big questions of life. And this morning, we're going to start with the most fundamental question. That question of, is God real? That question of, if God is real, what does that mean for my life? And we need to understand that there are huge consequences for how we answer the question of God. There's an author and a pastor, a guy by the name of A.W. Tozer, and he wrote this. He said, "What comes into our minds when we think about God, it's the most important thing about us." The answer to the question of God for our lives is one of the most consequential things we will ever answer for ourselves. And once upon a time, and I'm not talking about a fairy tale when I'm talking about God, but I am talking once upon a time this morning. There was once upon a time, the truth is that there is a belief in God or a God or gods. If you want to just travel back through time to ancient societies as well, it was assumed by the majority of people that something beyond this life existed. And even when you turn to the Bible, when you go to the very first line on the very first page of the very first chapter of the very first book, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, what does it say? It says, "In the beginning, God." It just presumes that God existed. The Bible does not set out to prove the existence of God for us from the very first page. It just assumes that there is this God, and this God did what? He created. He spoke into nothing, and everything that we know, everything that we see came into existence. And we don't even have to look back too far within this nation to realize that once upon a time, belief in God was among the majority. As of 2017, nearly all state constitutions, Nearly all state constitutions included a reference to God or something they called the divine. State constitutions. Now, our U.S. Constitution, you can pour through it, you can read it, it doesn't mention God. But our Declaration of Independence does. Our Pledge of Allegiance does. And if you have cash, which thankfully was supplied to me by Betty this morning, but if you have cash and you see the dollar bill up there, what does it say on the back of it? In God we trust. It says, in God we trust on our currency. Stats show that in 1967, the number of Americans who said, yes, I believe in God was 98%. 98, I don't know who that other 2% were, but there were 98% of people that claimed in America to believe in God in 1967. Now, by 2017, that number had dwindled by 11%. In 2017, 87% of the people said they believed in God. Now, that was 11% and how much? I can't even do the math. That's what, 50 years? In 50 years, it dwindled 11%. Now, by 2022, it was down to 81%. And that was the lowest in recorded American history at the time for people claiming to believe in God. That's still 81%. That's still a very good percentage of people within this nation that said they believe in God. But then when you begin to drill down on what it is that they say they believe when they're talking about God, when you're talking about the God of the Bible, the God that has a son named Jesus Christ and he loves this world and he gave him for this world, 68% of people would say they were certain that this God was real. Still in the majority, right? Still in the majority. Still a majority of people who say they would believe in the existence of God. Though that number is falling for those who would say they are certain. And that majority is trickling downward, especially with the rise in this nation of one of the largest groups of faith within this nation for people who would label themselves as a none. I'm not talking about N-U-N none. I'm talking about the N-O-N-E none. Those who say that they are among the nones say that they have no faith whatsoever. No religious basis. They're not affiliated with any church. They're not affiliated with any religion. And that is the largest growing statistic in America now for people who are claiming to be none. It's the largest growing. It's the fastest growing in this country. And today I want to tell you, younger generations are statistically twice as likely to describe themselves as an atheist as an older adult. Now that percentage is still very small. It's 13% to 6%, but it's double. It's double for the younger generations. But I want to tell you there is good news amidst what might be considered difficult news. There's a prevalent sense of hopelessness. Who has not felt it? There's a prevalent sense of despair. There's a prevalent sense of sadness in this world. And it is leading many people to realize that there has to be more to life than what? Than this. Than what we know, than what we see. There has to be. And it's leading so many among the younger generations. And Leo, maybe you've seen it. Maybe you've experienced through your work and crew. Maybe you have seen that there is a spiritual openness today. Maybe they don't know what they're open to, but they're seeking answers spiritually. There's a pastor and an author by the name of Shane Pruitt. And he travels the country and he speaks to teenagers. He speaks to college kids about the faith. And in 2023, he was quoted as saying that he has personally seen more college students and teenagers start following Jesus in the last 3 years than in the previous 18 years of ministry combined. I want to tell you that even in the midst of statistics that may be trending not the way we want, there is a great opportunity for another great spiritual awakening. There's a tremendous opportunity for the people of God who know what? Who know what they believe, who know why they believe it, and who know how to share the hope that they have. The question of whether God is real and what type of God He is, if we're truthful this morning, it resonates with all of us. That God is real and who He is, it resonates deeply. I mean, who doesn't want to know what they came from? Who doesn't want to know that there's more to life than this? Who doesn't want to know what happens when we die? Who doesn't want to know that we're not just an accumulation of just random accidents of nature, or the simple fact that a loving God has infused our existence with meaning? You know, it's even said that that innate longing for something that is transcendent in our lives, that longing that is within all of us, and I don't have it on the screen, but if you go to the book of Ecclesiastes, it says that God has placed eternity within the hearts of people. That innate sense of longing within us could very well be evidence that there is more to this life and that God is real. There's a Christian philosopher. His name is Douglas Groothuis. I know I'm probably butchering his last name, but that's the best way I could figure out how to pronounce it. Douglas Groothuis. And he wrote this. He said, "We all experience a deep sense of yearning or longing for something that the present natural world cannot fulfill. Something transcendently glorious." And that longing for the transcendent, that longing for something more may just very well be proof and evidence that God is real. Now, one way or another, which way you believe, one way or another, your beliefs have real consequences. They have real consequences for this life, and they have real consequences for eternity. And that's because the way we live, the way we structure our lives, and even the way we think about life, and the very things that we value about life, all of those things flow from what? They flow from these deeply held convictions about who made this world, and who is in charge of this world, and what He has to say about our lives, and wherever you are at this morning. And I know we're having problems online this morning, but if anybody comes across this, wherever you are at, whatever questions you may have swirling around in your head, whatever things keep you awake at night. And I know that there are questions that you have because, as I mentioned, those index cards, I got a lot of them last week. We got a lot of questions on those index cards last week. And I had this question. And is that question still up there? Did I have that on there? If you could ask God, I got it. I added it. If you could ask God one question, what would you ask Him? That's what we said last week. We got a bunch of responses. If you didn't have a chance to do that last week, do it this week. Write a question down during the rest of this message. Put it back in the offering plate. I'm not guaranteeing that I'm ever going to answer it. Because the best I can give for some of those questions is, well, I don't know. That's the best I can give for some of those. But believe me, even if I can't handle it, God can. So if you have a question, write it down. Put it in there. Maybe this week you thought of another one. Write it down and put it in their offering plate. And I want to say this. Whether you are sure this morning of what you know and what you believe, maybe you're seeking. Maybe you're searching. Maybe you're solid, or maybe you're doubting. Wherever you're at this morning in faith, I would invite you for the rest of this message just to open your hearts. I would invite you for the rest of this message just to open up your minds to the possibility that there is more to life than what we know and what we see. There's more. There's more to it. And that God not only has given us evidence of who He is, but He wants to be known by us. God wants to be found by those who seek Him. The prophet Jeremiah, God spoke through Jeremiah once to a weary group of people, and he said this. God said, "Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord." Many of us in this room, maybe we grew up during a time, and maybe we still feel like we're a part of that time from time to time. But have you ever heard a phrase, the Bible says it and that settles it? Have you ever heard that phrase? Many of us grew up during a time where that was enough, right? The Bible said it, that settles it. But today, we have to be prepared to give an answer for the hope that we have. Because there are so many people that will not take that for an answer. Hope in the belief that there is a God. Hope in the belief that this God of the Bible is the one who created the world. And because He created the world, that has some meaning for our life. That means that since He created this world, what does that mean about it? That means He rules this world. That means what He says is supposed to go in this world. And this God has an intended design for the way life is best to flourish in this world. And how we handle the answers to those questions, then that matters for this life and it matters for the next. And so to see that this morning, we're going to go back to that passage of Scripture that I talked about at the beginning of this message in Psalm 19. And as we go back to Psalm 19, we're actually traveling back in time 3,000 years. And I know some of you are like, well, Matt, it feels like you've been talking already for 3,000 years. Just deal with it, okay? But we're going to go back to Psalm 19, and we're going to read verses 1 through 4 again. And we're going to hear what David says once more. David says, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of His hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech, they use no words, and no sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. And in the heavens God has pitched a tent for the sun." So David is saying day and night, perpetually, time without end. All of the universe is continually pointing to what? The existence of God. All of the universe, he says, points to the existence of God. It was going on yesterday. It's going on today. It will be going on tomorrow. And it is screaming, there is a God, because he made all of this. Have you ever just paused and considered the handiwork of God in creation? I have never been the kind of person that has just been taken in by the beauty of nature sometimes and been like, oh, well, that's neat. I'm generally not that person. I'm not that soft of a person. I remember when we went to the Grand Canyon, when we were in youth group back in high school, we're standing behind this huge, just massive, just Grand Canyon. And I'm like, that's a big hole in the ground, you know? That's the best I could give at that moment. There's a big hole in the ground. Now I'm a little softer. I will tell you this. Just a few weeks back around Christmas, I took this picture when we were in Ohio on Cassie's mom and dad's farm. You probably can't get that from my phone really, but that is the brightest rainbow I have ever seen in my life. I could taste the Lucky Charms. I mean, I could just taste them. At the other end of this farm, I was ready to go run and I was ready to get them. And I've seen some of you actually share this picture on Facebook and more this week. Have y'all seen this picture of Moorhead this week? I mean, just how amazing. And I know that when Cassie first came to Moorhead, I drove her down 801 when you go and you come across the hill and you see just the trees and the hills and everything. She just loved that was her first view of this area. But I mean, what an amazing place we live in that we can see things like that. Now, some of you are getting in your fields because Pasquale's is gone and things like that, but don't worry about it. But I mean, we can see creation and we can see nature and we can see that there are times we can admire the handiwork of God. And like David, we can see that all of creation is shouting out what? Is there a God? You bet there is. You bet there is. You bet there is a God. The very stars in the heavens proclaim it and declare it. But still everyone wonders from time to time. We wonder from time to time, but that's because belief is what? Belief in God, it's not based on seeing with our eyes. Belief in God, it's not based on feeling with our hands. Belief in God, it's not based on hearing with our ears. What's it based on? It's based on faith. It's based on faith. And thankfully, the Bible gives us a definition of faith. And it's found in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. It says, now faith is confidence. Catch that word. Confidence. Faith is confidence in what we hope for. And it's assurance about what we do not see. Whether you realize it or not, you and I use faith on a daily basis. I don't know how many of you go out and bury your money in the backyard. If that's you, go for it. I hope you know where it's at. But we have faith when we put money in the bank that what? It's going to be there when we need it. When we get up in the morning, we have faith in that alarm clock that it is going to wake us up. And if I hit snooze 20 times, it's still going to be there for me when I'm ready to actually get up. We have faith when we put our feet out of bed in the morning on the floor that the floor is not just going to give way from us. We have faith when we go to the shower and we turn the hot water on. We have faith that our hot water heater is working and we've paid our bills. You know, we have faith in that sort of stuff. We have faith when we go outside that we are going to be able to start our car and it is going to start up first turn, or maybe after giving the car a stern talking to occasionally, right? That it is going to start up. We have faith in so many things. All day long, you and I are using faith in so many ways, but none of those things are what? They're not blind faith. None of those things are blind faith. Based on reason, based on evidence, and based on past experiences, you know that your faith in those things is there because those things have worked before. And you have faith that they're going to work again. And I want to tell you, that type of faith is exactly the way God has set up the world to work. Our universe is so complex. Our universe is so vast, but it is also so precise that just looking at something like the stars makes us pause to consider, who put those there? Who put those things there? And David says it like this. He says, those things that you're wondering about and thinking about, those things are declaring to you that there is a God. And he put those things there. And that God, he actually loves you. I mean, it's just amazing to think about. But creation itself, the beauty of it, the vastness of it, that's one of the first evidences of the existence of God. Everything that we know and see around us. And there are other what might be considered these, and I'm going to put these in air quotes, classical arguments that are mostly just philosophical arguments for the existence of God. And I'm going to quickly just run through a few of them with you this morning. And I'm going to do this as simplified as possible because that's how I work. And that's how I best need to function in my mind. I need to be simple, okay? So if these are too simple for you, just deal with it. This is Matt's Cliff Notes of these versions, all right? But the first philosophical argument I want to bring up to you this morning is what's known as the teleological argument. The teleological argument. And when it comes to religion, this teleological argument, it's built around the design and the purpose of this world. Simply put, because stuff exists, you have to explain where that stuff came from. That's the Matt version, okay? Because stuff exists, then you need to be able to explain where stuff came from. There's one writer I ran across recently. He's a Harvard-educated writer, but his name is George Sim Johnston. And he said this. He said that if the full text of an encyclopedia were to arrive in computer code from outer space, most people would regard this as what? As proof of the evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence. But he says, but when intelligence from beyond is seen in nature, then it's explained as the workings of random forces. Now, the classic illustration here is that of a watch. You heard the watchmaker argument before. Maybe some of you have heard this, that if you were out wandering in a field and you came upon a watch, you wouldn't be like, oh, look what the rain did. Look what the elements did. And some grass withered and a watch grew up. No, you would look at the watch and you would see its intricacy. You would see its design. You would see its complexity, but you would also see its specificity. All of these gears and all these internal mechanisms were put there by who? A watchmaker. So if you saw a watch laying in a field somewhere, then you would conclude there has to be a watchmaker somewhere. So this argument tells us that when we look at the specified complexity of life, we realize that it can't just be the result of random natural forces, that there had to have been a purposeful designer. That's the first argument. Next one. Another philosophical argument. This one's called the cosmological argument. And this is basically boils down to the law of cause and effect. That for every effect, there has to be a cause. Simplified. For everything that exists, something had to have caused it to exist. And if you track things back far enough, if you do this scientifically, and I know you people that are much smarter than me, all of you. I'm just talking to all of you. If you track things back far enough in the universe, you're going to get back to a point where there was a first cause. Some people call it what? Like a big bang, right? That things existed. Now, Aristotle, Greek philosopher, called this first cause, he called it in his language, in his day, an unmoved mover. Now, when we look at this from the position of arguing for the existence of God, we are saying that God is the one who existed in the beginning, before the beginning of time. Remember what Genesis told us? Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning what? God. In the beginning, God. I cannot even begin to wrap my head around the vastness of space. I just can't do it. When I think about galaxies and I think about the solar system and I think about all of this stuff in space, I cannot even begin to just take in just how big it is. But what I want you to do this morning, I want you and I to zoom out for a second. Let's picture that you and I were on the outside looking in at space. And let's say that we would take all of the galaxies, which are estimated to be somewhere between 200 billion and 2 trillion galaxies, including all the solar systems, including all the planets, including all the stars. And we took all of that stuff and we shrunk it down and we put it inside of this. Can you picture that with me? See, I can't because it's beyond my head. But let's take space and time and everything and let's put it in the middle of this hula hoop. Zach Adams saw this hula hoop earlier, and I think he's over here in the nursery maybe. Is Zach over here in the nursery? But he asked me what I was going to do with this hula hoop. I told him he was going to have to come and hula hoop while I was talking. He said he couldn't hula hoop. But you can come out later and do that, Zach. But let's take all of this stuff and let's put it in the middle of this. Now, everything within this had to have had what? It had to have had a cause, right? This stuff just didn't come into being. It had to have had a cause. So also there's a law. What is it? The law, was it the second law of thermodynamics? I'm taught the law of entropy, that all of these things are kind of wasting away and they'll eventually will lose what they have. I'm beyond my depths here, but I'm getting close to it. I'm dancing around it. But all of these things are at some point wasting away. What would have caused these things? The things that would have fit in this, or would it have had to have been something outside of this that caused this? You see, everything in here is material. Everything in here is bound by time. Everything in here is bound by matter. Everything in here is bound by space. Wouldn't it make sense that there was something beyond it who was immaterial, who is timeless, who was in the beginning, who will be in the end, who is spirit, caused things like this? That's simplified, but that's the cosmological argument. Wouldn't that first cause, that originator, that creator, wouldn't he need to be there for something that is independent, self-caused, self-reliant, unlimited, all-powerful, with no beginning and no end? That's what the Bible describes God as. All of those things and more. I want to tell you, there's still some people in their lives who would say, you know what, I'll believe in God when he throws up a big neon sign in the sky and says, hey, I'm God. Jesus did all that stuff he said he did, and your life is mine. God did a lot of that stuff in the Old Testament. He did a lot of that stuff. He parted a sea for his people to walk through on dry ground. God led them through the wilderness for years with what? A big pillar of cloud and a big pillar of fire. And not only that, when you think about people like Elijah, who did just miraculous things, who dug this big trench and filled it with water and had a sacrifice, and he dumped even more water on top of it, and then God did what in front of the people? He rained down fire and consumed the altar and ate it all up with fire. And yet his people still wandered. Yet his people still went astray. Yet his people's hearts still turned to other gods that weren't the God. It wouldn't matter if a neon sign showed up in the sky. There would still be some people who would be like, you know what? Somebody else put that there. It wouldn't matter for some people to say that we would be any different than God's people in history. You know, I want to say this morning that God has given more than enough clues of his existence for any rational person to conclude that he exists. In a courtroom, we call this the preponderance of evidence. It's what it's called in a courtroom, the preponderance of evidence. In other words, this is once again Matt's simplification. In light of the evidence that the existence of God is something that is more what? More likely than not. And there were even those who would deny the truth of the Bible. There are even those who would deny the claims of Christianity, who would say about the truth like the dude in the Big Lebowski, that's just like your opinion, man. They would say that. But Romans chapter 1 verse 20 tells us this: for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power, his divine nature, they have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made. And here's the tricky part. So that what? So that all people are without excuse. There is no excuse for not being able to look around and be like, you know, something caused this. Something made this. Something beyond us brought this into existence. And if we would stop and look around and openly and honestly take it all in, we know we're without excuse. Final philosophical argument for the existence of God. It's called the moral argument. And this is simply this, that humanity's innate sense of right and wrong, that's an indicator of a moral God who has instilled his values in us. Russian author Fyodor Dostoevsky, he once wrote this. He said, if God does not exist, then everything is permitted. You see, we all have a sense in this life that there is a way that things ought to be done. And we also have a sense in this life that there are certain things that should never be done for any reason whatsoever. When we look around the world, we see that the applications of some of these morals, they may vary in the way we apply them from person to person, but there are intrinsic values that are common across societies, that are common across cultures. I mean, we know what justice should look like. We know what justice should look like in this life. We have a strong dislike in this life for things that we see that are unjust. You don't have to look far through what? The news. You don't have to look far through your social media feed. You don't have to look too far for stories of how people are being mistreated in this world. We see it in war. We see it in bigotry. We see it in hatred. We see it in all of these ways. We see it in lack of love that is taking place at home and abroad. Who has not felt empathy for someone else when we see them being mistreated? Who doesn't feel that? But then again, how often do we look around this world and see that injustice prevails? Injustice, if I can say the right word. When people don't get what's coming to them, what Stanley Hudson once referred to as Texas justice, when we don't see that taking place. You know, if you're familiar with the story arc of the Bible, it takes 3 chapters for this world to be broken. 3 chapters. It took God 7 days to create and say the world was good, and it takes 3 chapters for humans to step in and be like, you know what? We know better than this God fella how to do this stuff. And they chose their own way. And it is because of that brokenness that sin brought into the world that we see the effects of that brokenness each and every day. Not every act in this life that deserves punishment gets it. Not every good guy wins the day. Not every criminal gets punished. We believe, however, based on this moral argument, that if God didn't exist, that this natural inclination we have towards justice, that wouldn't exist either. And without that moral inclination among all of us, then this world would be an extremely dark place indeed. But thankfully, since we know that this God does exist, since we have assurance that He does exist, so too we have assurance that our lives matter. So too we have assurance that we have purpose in this life. And so too we have assurance that there will be one day what? Justice. Justice. Tomorrow's Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and he famously said what? He said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And how do we explain that sense of moral right or wrong? You see, the conclusion is that it can't be self-invented. The conclusion is that it just doesn't just something that we all just came up with consciously. The conclusion is that it had to come from a moral law giver. And Paul says this in Romans chapter 2, verse 14 and 15. He said, indeed, when Gentiles, and he's talking about people who are outside of the Jewish faith, he's saying that when they who do not have the law do by nature things required by the law, that they're a law for themselves, even though they don't have the law. He's saying these people who have never heard the law of God, they're doing stuff according to the law of God. And why is that? He says they show that the requirements of the law are written where? On their hearts. The requirements of their law are within, and their consciences also bear witness, and their thoughts sometimes accuse them, and at other times even defend them. When we add all of this up together, this cumulative effect of the design and purpose of this world, of the complexity yet the specificity, and also this inner ethical sense, what these things do to us is they impress upon us when we take the weight of it all together, that there is a potential of what? Of a designer. There's a potential of a designer. And these very truths once led a German philosopher by the name of Immanuel Kant. He wrote these things. He said, 2 things fill the mind with ever new and increasing admiration and awe. The more often and steadily reflection is occupied on them. And he said it was this. He said it was the starry heaven above and the moral law within me. What does the Bible claim? We'll talk about the Bible here in a couple weeks and talk about its reliability and how we can trust it as the Word of God. But what does the Bible claim? The Bible claims that God has revealed Himself through creation. The Bible claims that God has revealed Himself through His written Word. But God has fully revealed Himself through the Word made flesh, Jesus Christ, who came to this earth, took on our flesh, took on our frailty, but yet lived perfectly because He was God in the flesh. And because of His great love for us, what Jesus did was He went to a cross to die for all the ways we do what? We reject God's rule. That we reject that God is real. That we reject that God has specific designs for our lives. And God did all of that because He wants us to know how much He loves us and He wants to be known by us. But ultimately, faith is not about having the complete, perfect answers to everything. Faith is not about having the complete, perfect answers to everything, to every spiritual issue that will ever arise. You do not have to have every answer to put your faith in God. The truth is, we don't demand that level of conclusive proof for much of anything in this life. Why do we demand it of God? So I just want to show you this real quick. You know, I got this bottle of water up here. Cracking open this baby. If I were to take a drink of the water out of this bottle, I would be well within my rights to look at it and say, you know what, that looks clear enough. Bodie, you didn't do anything to this, did you? I mean, it was sealed when I opened it, and I will tell you, I bought this at Walmart the other day. The way things go at Walmart now, I unloaded it off the truck, put it on the shelves, and took it and checked it out myself, you know? But I've had it in the fridge. Nobody's messed with it, but yet, there's that other thought. Is this poison? Bodie, you put something in my mind there. Is this poison? I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure, but I can take a step of faith. I can drink it. I can be well within my rights to drink it and taste it and find that it is really, truly good. Okay, now that's stupid, but listen. Faith in God is something similar. Faith in God is something similar. It is a choice. Faith in God is also a step of the will. Faith in God is a decision to want to know God personally. It is a decision to want to know Him. And what is it that we want to know about God? That we can experience forgiveness from the things that come between us and Him. What is it to want to know God? To have our shame taken away in this life. What is it to want to know God? To want to know, to live life the way He intended it to be living. To want to know God is what? To want to know that there is purpose, that there is meaning, and that all of this is in His hands. And one day we will not just be able to experience Him in this present life, but we will experience Him for eternity on end. And if we want to know that, what did He say through Jeremiah? If you seek me, you'll find me. If we want to know God, you better believe that He will reveal Himself. I'm not sure how He will do it for each of us specifically. Maybe in your life, you know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, you are certain God's real. God's real. But John chapter 1 verse 12 tells us what happens when we take up the offer on Him being real for our lives. Yet to all who did receive Him, to those who believed in His name, He gave the right to become children of God. When we believe God is real and that Jesus is His unique Son that He sent to this earth to live and to die and to resurrect, when we confess our faith in Him, when we pray a prayer of forgiveness, what does it say to us? Then we receive Him and we become His children. And if we're being honest this morning, if you and I are honest with ourselves, and why wouldn't we be? But sometimes the big issue is not whether or not we believe in this God, but the issue is what? Whether or not I trust this God. Whether or not I trust Him with my life. And if the God who is big enough to create the world, and not only that, but to have been sustaining the world from the beginning and will be sustaining it through the end, if He's big enough to handle that, you better believe He's big enough to handle our lives. He's big enough for us to place our trust in Him wholeheartedly. And as we get ready to respond in song here in a few minutes, if you guys want to come back up, I want to invite you to pray this morning. I'm going to give you 4 different prayers, and they're going to be on the screen this morning. I don't know which one of these is going to resonate with you wherever you're sitting at this morning, but I want to give you 4 prayers to respond with this morning. The first prayer is for those who maybe just need God to do what He said He would do in His Word, to reveal Himself to those who seek Him. And here's the first prayer. It's the prayer of a seeker. God, if you open my eyes to who you really are, then I'll open my life to you. Can you take up God on this prayer? The one who says, if you seek me, you'll find me. The next prayer. I'm always struck by the father who once came to Jesus and was asking Jesus for healing for his family. And in this passage of Scripture in Mark chapter 9, the Father says to Jesus, he says, well, I do believe, Jesus. But then He tells him, well, help me overcome my unbelief. Maybe sometimes in our lives when we come to Jesus with our doubts, we just need to say to Him, Jesus, I believe. Help me overcome those things that I question. Jesus, help me trust you and your word. Jesus, I believe. Help me overcome those places where I struggle. Maybe this morning God is just nudging you to pray a prayer of confession, a prayer of submission of your life to Him. Here's a prayer for that. God, I believe you created this world, and I believe you have complete say over it. And you know what that includes? That includes our life. God, I believe you sent Jesus to die in my place for the forgiveness of my sins, and I give my life to you. Save me, lead me, teach me what it looks like to live for you. And maybe for those of you out there this morning, this message has been nothing new to you. You know God, God's real, He exists. What are you talking about, Matt? Nobody questions this stuff. Maybe that's you this morning. You're solid, you're certain, you believe. Here's what I want you to pray. Just pray a prayer of worship to God. God, I worship you for how you have revealed yourself to me. But then add to it, help me find ways to let others know about the hope I have because you are real. Whichever way God may be leading you to pray this morning in a prayer of response, do so. This time is for you and God. Make sure that after we get done singing this song, that when you leave this place this morning, that you can say beyond a shadow of a doubt that it's well with your soul, because that's what we're about to sing. Is it well with your soul that you don't have to have all the answers, but you can have faith and trust that God is real and He has designs for your life? May it be well with your soul this morning when you leave this place. Will you stand and sing with us as we respond?